Welcome to the Winner's Circle, a drag racing podcast. I'm your host, Leroy Lease. I'm excited to share with you everything I've learned over the next however many episodes we end up doing. What I'd really like to do is turn this into a way to reach out to the community and find out some cool stories that people have from being at the track. You know, it costs a lot of money for us, even as bracket racers, to get out there and get to the track. Gas, rubber, engines, everything. It's expensive, and what we end up with at the end of the day is a time slip and good memories. So I'd love to hear about your different experiences. I've already heard interesting stories just talking with some buddies at the track about times when they were trailering to the race and the trailer became detached, or anything at all that's related to drag racing. I actually want to hear these stories, and I want to get them included in the show. So starting from this podcast number 1, I'm reaching out. Go to DragTracker.com/podcast and click on the little voicemail link on the right-hand side and leave me a voicemail. You can make it brief but to the point, and then we can connect and we can figure out the best way for you to tell your story. You can also email me at podcast@DragTracker.com or Leroy@DragTracker.com. But I want to hear what you've experienced, and I think everybody will really enjoy it. That's one thing I want to highlight, which is your stories. The other thing is Q&A. If you've got a question about something you haven't seen it answered in the forums, or maybe you have and you weren't satisfied with the answer, bring it up here. I'll be happy to research it, or if I have any insight, be happy to share it. You know, there's a lot of great people in our drag racing community who are interested in getting to the bottom of things and sharing answers. They won't be as interested in sharing it when they're in the lane across from you, so let's ask it. Let's find out, and we'll explore it together. Today's episode is going to focus on the 6 things you need to know about doing a burnout. So I put this list together. I've been to a bunch of different tracks in the Northeast and in the Southeast, and I've seen it done a bunch of different ways. Maybe there's some things that you need to know before you go to the track. For you veterans, this should seem pretty rudimentary, and if you have anything to add, you can go to the show notes and make a comment. So that'll be at dragtracker.com/podcast/1 for episode 1. The comments will be open and we can have a discussion about it. But I think these 6 things are pretty solid as far as these are things that I've seen done everywhere I've been racing. But I'm certainly open to any input. So with that, let's get started. All right. Number one is a myth that a burnout is done to get the tires hot. Now, I have an infrared temperature sensor, and I've actually tracked the temperature of the surface of the tire during a burnout. It does go up. Might get up to 160, 150 degrees, which is pretty hot, but it cools right down. And then at takeoff, depending on the ambient air temperature, the track temperature, if the tire's been sitting in the sun, it might be 95 or 125 degrees, but it really doesn't change that much temperature-wise as the run goes on. So I just don't believe it can be truly heating up the tires. In fact, I would submit to you that driving around the pits with a low-pressured tire is going to heat them up more than just doing the burnout will do. So why do we do a burnout? Well, I think the reason they do a burnout is to scrape off the outer layer of rubber. What that does then is it makes the tars and oils inside the rubber come out to the surface. When that's out at the surface, then the tire's going to stick better. So that's more of a goal of doing a burnout, to clean off any debris, but also get an extra or a layer of rubber cleared off, so you've got a clean, smooth yet sticky surface for when you go racing. Number 2. Dry hops. Now, you used to see these. If you ever do a YouTube search for Bob Glidden doing a burnout in a pro stock from the 80s, even maybe the early 90s, after they would do a burnout, they would back the car up, and then they would do what they called a dry hop, which was outside of the water box, but they let the clutch out and the car would jolt forward 10 or 15 feet. I'm actually not sure why they would do this. May have had something to do with checking to make sure the clutch could fully engage, may have had something to do with cleaning out the engine. I'm kind of skeptical about either of those, but what I'm pretty sure it would do was clear off then anything that was on the tire. They probably didn't have as clean of tracks back then. They weren't as diligent about making it clean. Maybe it was to clean off any debris that might have been down the track after they did the burnout. But I'm sure what it did do was take off that layer of tar and oil. So you don't see any pro stock cars do that. You don't really see very many cars at all do that. As a bracket racer, I haven't done a dry hop for any reason other than check for mechanical soundness of my car, I mean, since the mid-90s. So you don't see that very much anymore. But if you look at a YouTube video or an archive video from NHRA or any racing, dry hops were something that everybody they did. Number 3, no rocks in the water box. It's kind of a common courtesy to clean off your tires before you get into the water box. There's no sense in dragging up their cigarette butts and rocks and possibly glass and bottle tops or cap tops, or pop tops into the water box. That's not the place. They're dangerous for slicks. Rocks can puncture a tire. So unless the track you race at has the staging lanes directly behind the water box, generally it's a common courtesy to do a quick, almost like a chirpy, but it's a way just a quick clean off of your tires to get all the rocks off and dirt, sand, grass, anything that's on your slicks. I know I've raced at Knoxville drag strip, and there is no area to do to clean off your tires. As soon as you turn a corner, you're basically in the water box. So nobody really does it there. But when I raced at Mason-Dixon in Maryland, and even at Emerald Coast Dragway in Florida, there were places to clear off your tires, and it was it's a courtesy. You're supposed to do that before you get in the water box. So that's something to keep in mind. If you haven't been doing that, now you know. Number 4, if you race a full body car, it's a courtesy to let your opponent, if they're racing a rail car or a dragster or an altered or any kind of car that doesn't have front brakes, it's a courtesy to let them do their burnout first. And the reason is, if they don't have brakes on the front, they don't have a way to line lock their car, stop it from rolling forward, they're going to have to do a burnout past the starting line out to 60 feet. And it's going to take them time then to back the car up and get it in position. So you've got time. It's a courtesy to wait until usually the people working the starting line will give you an indication, waving at you or nodding their head or giving you a thumbs up that now you can go. But it's usually after the dragster or altered has already made their burnout. So that's something to keep in mind. If you've never raced a rail car, the first time you get up there and you wonder why they're holding you back, it's just to give the other guy more time, and that's okay. Number 5 is a myth. You should rev the engine all the way until it hits the stutter box and keep the RPM very high. You actually shouldn't do this. I mean, for the health of your engine, there are harmonics that can cause the valve train to break down by keeping it at a sustained RPM. Running your car up against the stutter box under a load like that, it's going to be difficult on the engine, I would imagine. It may not hurt your drivetrain. I mean, that kind of depends. That's subjective, but it's really not good for your engine. And I didn't make this up. It makes sense to me, but Reher Morrison, I actually found it on their blog, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You know, there's no reason to run it up and keep it up against, right up against the, like I said, the stutter box, the rev limiter. You know, let your burnout go through the RPM range, let it shift, you know, make your shifts, let it come down, go back up. There's no reason to strain the engine during this time. You know, get to your final gear and pull through. Again, you're not really, it's not like you're building up a lot of heat in these tires. You're not trying to, unless you're doing a burnout competition, if you get some smoke and you run through your gears, it's probably enough. Your tires have been cleaned off. And finally, number 6 is about the roll control or the line lock. if you drive a street car and you've always wondered how these other full body cars are doing a burnout, like, in the parking lot, you floor it while you let off the brake. It's hard to break the tires loose so much that the car stands still, and yet, a car like our car seems to just stand still, no problem. Front tires don't move. Well, that's because we have what's called a line lock. And so what that means is when I get up to do my burnout, I pull forward, get my tires covered with water, and then I pump the brakes up to 1,100 pounds of pressure, and then I have a trigger button on my shifter that I engage, and that locks, it's called a line lock, it locks the brake line so that the front tires now have 1,100 pounds of pressure holding them. It releases the brake lines from the rear, so they're not controlled by the line lock, and so my brakes are off in the rear. And it's sort of the opposite of an emergency brake, except that as soon as I let go of the button, everything is done. As far as the brake fluid completely comes back to the reservoir, or the master cylinder. So that's how they do it. It's called a line lock. It's called a roll control. If you search on any racing parts website for a roll control or line lock, I think you'll find plenty of options. But it does involve a little bit of work. You need to be comfortable taking apart your brake lines. There may be some idiosyncrasies. I mean, you'll have to read up on it. If you have any kind of anti-lock braking system, there may be some tricks to making this work so that you're not messing that up. So just be careful and do your research on that. But for a car like mine, a 68 Firebird that's been tubbed out, it's no problem to have roll control in there. And it's electronically run, so the switch, it needs power. And like I said, we have ours on our shifter, so I can just hit the button very easily. I've seen it for a lot of people on the steering wheel. All good options. I've also seen people, because they'll use a switch and then they just flip the switch off the dashboard or whatever whenever they're done with their burnout. But those are the 6 main points that I wanted to cover today about burnouts. If you find this helpful, go ahead and rate us in iTunes or wherever you found our podcast. If you would give us a rating, that'll help us get the word out. I love going to the forums. There's lots of great forums where people are very active, and they're sharing information. So we hope that this becomes a new way to get the word out and to get people interested and make them feel like they really understand what they're seeing when they're at the track. I'm really excited to go over some other things. In the next episode, I'm actually going to go over 5 things you absolutely need to bring with you to the track on race day. And this is as a driver or an owner. I don't know how many times I've got people coming up to us and our tow rig, and I don't have a very sophisticated rig. I've got an open trailer. I just have a pickup truck, but I bring the stuff that you need in order to compete. And if you're going rounds, I mean, sometimes stuff breaks. You need to be ready to recover from that, so you don't have to go home not having lost, but having to go home. A breakage can take you out of the running. So I've got 5 tips on things you absolutely need to bring, and we'll go over that. And then also I'm really excited to hear stories. So I want anything you've got as far as story-wise, send it over. The worst that can happen is I'm not able to use it, right away. But I have some great stories. I'm looking forward to sharing one with you where I hit a herd of goats on the drag strip. It was actually on the racetrack. I've got a great story about losing brakes. Well, great because it worked out. Everybody was okay. But anyway, I'm looking forward to, again, to just seeing what we come up with, seeing what the community comes up with. And I also have some tips for things that are going to be coming up in the upcoming episodes, are how to practice on a practice tree, good patterns there, how to use a logbook to really capitalize on the information there. So yeah, just send us your feedback. Again, you can check us out, DragTracker.com/podcast. You can email me, podcast@DragTracker.com, or Leroy@DragTracker.com.